Elizabeth's trembling hands froze mid-prayer when her mysterious hooded groom revealed his face at the altar. Not the disfigured monster of town gossip, but a proud half-Apache trader whose tribal markings guaranteed they'd both become targets in a territory where such unions were considered worse than death. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. New Mexico Territory, 1867. The dust rose in thin spirals along the parched road leading to St. Mary's Convent. Elizabeth Harmon clutched her worn leather satchel against her chest, each step heavier than the last. The wind whispered through the scattered mesquite trees, carrying whispers of promises she never thought she'd have to make. "It's just a marriage," she murmured to herself, the words hollow against the vastness of the New Mexico sky. Just a contract, nothing more. At 19, Elizabeth had imagined many futures for herself, running her father's ranch alongside her brothers, perhaps someday meeting a kind young man from a neighboring farm, falling in love beneath the star-scattered sky. She never imagined this, walking toward a stone building to discuss selling herself to a stranger. 3 months earlier, her father had been found dead beneath an overturned wagon, his body broken by the weight of the timber he'd been hauling. With him died all security the Harmon family had known. The debts emerged like vultures, circling, waiting to pick clean what remained of their dignity. Her mother took ill shortly after, the grief settling in her lungs like winter frost that refused to thaw. Elizabeth paused at the convent gate, her golden brown hair escaping from beneath her bonnet, dancing around her face in the breeze. Her green eyes, once bright with laughter, now carried the weight of responsibility for her 3 younger siblings. Thomas was 14, Sarah 11, and little James only 7. Their hungry faces haunted her dreams. The heavy wooden door swung open before she could knock. Sister Agnes stood in the threshold, her lined face softening at the sight of Elizabeth. "You've come," the nun said simply, stepping aside. "Mother Superior is expecting you." Elizabeth nodded, unable to force words past the knot in her throat. The convent hallways smelled of beeswax and prayers, cool stone walls offering a momentary reprieve from the relentless sun. Her worn boots echoed against the flagstones as Sister Agnes led her to the Mother Superior's office. Mother Superior Magdalene was not a woman given to unnecessary sentimentality. Her face, framed by her starched wimple, betrayed nothing as Elizabeth entered. "Miss Harmon," she said, gesturing to the wooden chair across from her desk. "I trust you have considered our proposal carefully." Elizabeth sat, her back rigid with pride, the last possession she could truly claim as her own. "I have questions," she said, proud that her voice didn't waver. "About this benefactor." Mother Superior nodded, her hands folded atop a leather-bound ledger. "Naturally." "Why me? Why does he ask for me specifically when we've never met?" The older woman's expression remained impassive. "He has seen you in town, observed your dedication to your family. He admires your character. And yet he won't show his face before the wedding. He demands anonymity until I'm bound to him by law and God." The bitterness seeped into Elizabeth's voice like water through cracked earth. "He has his reasons," Mother Superior replied. "Reasons he will explain himself when the time comes." Elizabeth's fingers tightened around her satchel. "They say in town he's disfigured, or ancient, or both. That's why he hides away at that trading post in the foothills." A flicker of something, amusement, irritation, crossed the nun's face. "People say many things when they lack understanding. Will he be cruel?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. Mother Superior's eyes softened slightly. "I have known this man for many years, child. He is many things, but cruel is not among them." Elizabeth swallowed hard. "And the terms?" "All debts paid in full, Your family may remain on the ranch. Your siblings will receive education, your mother medical care. In return, you will be his wife in all ways that entails. The weight of those last words pressed against Elizabeth's chest. Always. The marriage bed, children perhaps, a lifetime tied to a man she had never seen, whose very appearance caused others to whisper behind their hands. The wedding would take place in 1 week's time, here, in our chapel. Mother Superior paused. I understand this is not the match you dreamed of, Elizabeth, but dreams are luxuries some cannot afford. Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly, seeing her siblings' faces. Thomas trying so hard to be the man of the house. Sarah silently taking on chores beyond her years. Little James no longer asking for sweets he knew they couldn't afford. If I refuse, she asked, though she already knew the answer, the bank takes your home within the month. Your options afterward would be limited. Elizabeth nodded slowly. The choice was no choice at all. Then please inform the gentleman that I accept his proposal, she said, each word falling from her lips like stones into still water. Mother Superior nodded, something like compassion flickering in her eyes. You've made the practical decision, child. Not practical, Elizabeth corrected, rising to her feet. Necessary. As she walked back through the convent gardens, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the path. Overhead, a hawk circled, free and untethered. Elizabeth watched it until it disappeared beyond the mountains to the west, toward Apache territories, lands of legend and fear for the settlers. She wondered if it was better to know one's cage from the beginning, or to discover it only after the door had been closed. In 1 week, she would have her answer. The Harmon homestead had never felt smaller than during that week of waiting. Elizabeth moved through the familiar rooms like a ghost, cooking, mending, comforting, all while the hours slipped relentlessly towards Sunday. Each sunset felt like a betrayal, stealing time she wasn't ready to surrender. Her mother watched from her sickbed by the window, eyes hollow from consumption, but still sharp with a mother's perception. You don't have to do this, Lizzie, she whispered on the third evening, her thin fingers clasping Elizabeth's wrist with surprising strength. Elizabeth forced a smile, tucking the quilt around her mother's shoulders. And what would you have me do instead? Watch Thomas try to work himself to death in father's place? See Sarah's hands bleed from washing other people's laundry? We could manage, her mother insisted, though the rattle in her chest belied her words. The way we've managed these past months? Elizabeth shook her head. The food stores are almost gone. The seed money for spring planting was spent on medicine for you. This is the only path forward. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. To be bound to a man, they say many things, Elizabeth interrupted, echoing Mother Superior's words. Gossip is the currency of small minds. Yet even as she spoke, Elizabeth couldn't quiet her own fears. The whispers had only intensified since her visit to the convent. Mrs. Peterson at the general store claimed the mysterious trader was hideously scarred from a fire. Old man Jenkins swore he'd glimpsed him once, a hulking figure with a twisted spine. And Cecily Wade, always eager to share the most ghastly version of any tale, insisted he wasn't fully human at all, but something wild and dangerous. Half-breed, Cecily had whispered dramatically when Elizabeth collected her mother's medicine. They say his mother was captured by Apaches, and he was the result. Has their markings on his face. That's why he stays hidden up in those hills, running that trading post through messengers. Elizabeth had simply pressed her lips together and paid for the medicine. She wouldn't give Cecily the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Thomas took the news the hardest, his boyish face flushing red with anger when Elizabeth finally told the children of her decision. I'll kill him if he hurts you, he declared, hands balled into fists at his sides. You'll do no such thing, Elizabeth replied firmly. "You'll be the man of this house while I'm gone. Mother and Sarah and James need you." Thomas turned away, shoulders shaking with emotions too large for his 14 years to contain. Later, Elizabeth found him in the barn, furiously brushing down their remaining horse. "I should be the one taking care of us," he said without looking at her. "Not watching you sacrifice yourself." Elizabeth leaned against the stall door. "Sometimes sacrifice is exactly what family means, Thomas." On the 5th day, a wagon arrived from the trading post. The driver, a weathered Mexican man who introduced himself only as Miguel, didn't meet Elizabeth's eyes as he unloaded crates of supplies. "From your intended, señorita," he said, handing her a sealed envelope. "For your family." Inside the crates, Elizabeth found sacks of flour and sugar, coffee beans, dried meat, new fabric, medicine for her mother. Provisions that would have cost 3 months' earnings in better times. The envelope contained a banker's draft that would clear all their debts with a simple note in a strong, slanted hand. "I ask much of you. Let me at least ensure your family's comfort while I do so." No name, no romantic words, just practical care, expressed in the language of survival that Elizabeth understood all too well. Sarah found her later, sitting on the porch step, the note still in her hand. "Is he very terrible, do you think?" the 11-year-old asked, leaning against Elizabeth's shoulder. Elizabeth tucked the note into her pocket. "I don't know what he is, little one, but you're still going." "I gave my word," Sarah nodded solemnly. "Father always said a Harmon's word was as good as gold." "Better," Elizabeth corrected gently, "since words can't be stolen or spent." On the last night, Elizabeth packed her meager belongings into her mother's old trunk. The white dress she'd sewn hastily from the provided fabric lay across the bed, simple, unadorned, practical, like the marriage it represented. Little James crept into her room long after he should have been asleep. Without a word, he placed something in her palm. A small carved wooden bird, clumsy but recognizable, painted with berry juice. "So you remember to fly home sometimes," he explained, his small face serious in the lamplight. Elizabeth gathered him close, allowing herself one moment of tears against his soft hair. "I will always find my way back to you," she promised, "no matter what happens tomorrow." She just prayed it was a promise she could keep. Dawn broke with cruel indifference on Elizabeth's wedding day. She watched the sun climb over the eastern hills from her bedroom window, her fingers absently tracing the grain of the wooden bird James had given her. Miguel arrived precisely at 9, the same weathered wagon now polished, a spray of desert wildflowers tied to the bench seat. He helped load her trunk without comment, his eyes respectful but distant. The goodbyes were mercifully brief. Elizabeth's mother was too weak to rise, so Elizabeth knelt beside her bed, receiving a trembling blessing. Thomas stood rigid in the doorway, his jaw set against emotion. Sarah clung until the last moment, while James solemnly presented another carved animal, a horse this time, whispering, "So you can ride home to us." As the wagon pulled away, Elizabeth didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see her family framed in the doorway, growing smaller with each turn of the wheels. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the road ahead, the convent's bell tower already visible on the horizon. "Is he?" Elizabeth began, then faltered, unsure what to ask the silent man beside her. "Is he kind? Is he truly disfigured? Will I survive this?" Miguel kept his eyes on the road. "It is not for me to speak of my employer, señorita. But you've seen him. You know him." The man's weathered face softened slightly. "I have known him many years. He is..." Miguel seemed to choose his words carefully. "He is not what people say." Elizabeth waited for more, but Miguel lapsed into silence, leaving her with a cryptic answer that could mean anything or nothing. At the convent, A flutter of nuns descended upon her like black-winged birds. They whisked her away to a small chamber adjacent to the chapel, where a basin of scented water and her simple white dress awaited. "The bridegroom has arrived," Sister Agnes informed her, helping Elizabeth out of her traveling clothes. "He awaits in Mother Superior's office until the ceremony." Elizabeth's hands trembled as she washed the dust from her skin. "Has he given his name?" Sister Agnes exchanged glances with a younger nun who was arranging Elizabeth's hair. Something passed between them. Amusement? Conspiracy? "He prefers to introduce himself," Sister Agnes replied. As the nuns dressed her, Elizabeth noticed their demeanor had changed. Gone was the solemn pity she'd sensed during her previous visit. Instead, they seemed almost expectant. Sister Josephine, usually the most severe of the sisters, actually smiled as she fastened tiny pearl buttons up Elizabeth's back. "There now," the young nun said, stepping back. "A lovely bride." Elizabeth glanced at her reflection in the small looking glass. The dress was plain but well-fitted, making the most of her slender figure. Her golden brown hair had been arranged in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with sprigs of rosemary and sage from the convent garden. She looked like herself, yet not herself, familiar features arranged into the countenance of a stranger. "It's time," Mother Superior announced from the doorway. Her typically stern face bore an unusual expression, almost anticipatory, as though she were party to some secret about to unfold. The chapel was cool and dim, scented with beeswax and old stone. Only the nuns were present, arranged in the pews like ravens, their curious eyes following Elizabeth's slow procession down the aisle. At the altar stood Father Thomas, ancient and slightly stooped, his prayer book open in gnarled hands, and beside him, a figure cloaked entirely in a hooded black robe that concealed every inch of the man beneath it. Elizabeth's steps faltered. This was more than anonymity. This was theater of the macabre. "Courage, child," Mother Superior murmured, squeezing Elizabeth's arm before guiding her forward. Father Thomas began the ceremony, his voice echoing against the stone walls. Elizabeth's responses came automatically, her eyes fixed on the hooded figure beside her, searching for any glimpse of the man within. Was that his breathing she heard, measured and deep? Were those his hands, still hidden in the folds of his robe? "And now," Father Thomas said, "before God and these witnesses, the groom may reveal himself to his bride." A collective intake of breath from the nuns. Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs as the figure slowly raised gloved hands to the hood. In one fluid motion, he pushed it back. Elizabeth gasped. Before her stood not an old man, not a disfigured recluse, but a tall, broad-shouldered man, perhaps in his early 30s. His features were striking, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and penetrating dark eyes that held hers with unwavering intensity. His skin was bronzed from the sun, and his black hair, streaked with a single silver strand at the temple, was tied back with a leather cord. But what caused her breath to catch was the distinctive markings on his face, intricate blue-black lines that curved along his cheekbones and across his forehead in patterns she recognized from illustrations of Apache warriors. "I am John Blackwood," he said in a voice deep and clear, "though my mother's people called me Two Rivers." Behind her, a nun, Sister Josephine, actually giggled. Elizabeth stood frozen, her mind struggling to reconcile the man before her with the monstrous figure of her imagination. Not disfigured, not ancient, but something the townspeople would consider worse, a man with Apache blood. The chapel spun around her. She was distantly aware of the nuns watching, their expressions ranging from amusement to gentle compassion. Mother Superior's face remained impassive, though something like satisfaction flickered in her eyes. "You deceived me," Elizabeth managed, her voice barely above a whisper. John Blackwood's dark eyes held hers steadily. "I denied you nothing but my face. and only until this moment. You allowed me to believe. I allowed gossips to speak as gossips do, he interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. Had I approached you openly, would you have consented to know me? Or would the marks of my mother's people have decided my character before I spoke a single word? The truth of it stung. Elizabeth had grown up hearing stories of Apache raids, of settlers taken or killed. Fear of the tribes was woven into the fabric of territorial life, as commonplace as dust storms and water shortages. Would she have given him fair consideration? She wasn't certain. "The ceremony," Father Thomas prompted gently. "Shall we continue?" Elizabeth looked from the priest to her revealed groom, awareness dawning that she still had a choice. She could refuse now, walk away, and condemn her family to destitution, or she could proceed binding herself to this stranger with the face of what many considered an enemy. John must have read her thoughts. "I will honor our agreement regardless of your choice now," he said quietly. "Your family's security is assured. This decision is yours alone." A murmur rippled through the nuns. Such an offer, to pay yet release her from obligation, was unheard of. Elizabeth studied him more carefully. His clothing beneath the discarded robe was well made but simple. A white shirt, dark trousers, polished boots. No flamboyance, no excessive display of the wealth he clearly possessed. The Apache markings on his face were permanent, tattoos that proclaimed his heritage to any who saw him. Yet he carried himself with quiet dignity, neither hiding his nature nor flaunting it as a challenge. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. A shadow of something, vulnerability, crossed his face. "I have watched you in town these past months, your courage, your devotion to your family. I admired what I saw. You could have spoken to me then, and competed with the sons of ranchers and merchants who courted you before your father's death, men without complications of blood and history." He shook his head slightly. "I chose a path where what I could offer might outweigh what I am." Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks, remembering the young men who had indeed called upon her in better days and who had disappeared when the Harmon fortunes fell. "The choice remains yours, Miss Harmon," he said formally. Elizabeth drew a steadying breath. The man before her was not what she had feared, yet neither was he what she had hoped for in her girlhood dreams. But he was offering something none of those former suitors had: salvation for her family, wrapped in honest acknowledgement of his motives. "Continue, Father," she said. The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur. Elizabeth spoke her vows mechanically, feeling the cool metal of a ring slip onto her finger. A simple gold band, unadorned but solid. When Father Thomas instructed John to kiss his bride, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead instead, a gesture of respect that acknowledged the chasm still between them. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, the name strange and new on his tongue. The nuns surrounded them then, offering congratulations with bright eyes and knowing smiles. Elizabeth realized they had been part of the deception, or perhaps they considered it merely a dramatic revelation. Either way, their evident approval of John suggested they knew him far better than the gossiping townspeople did. "You arranged all this?" she asked Mother Superior, as they walked from the chapel toward the convent gates, where Miguel waited with the wagon. "Mr. Blackwood has been a friend to this convent for many years," the older woman replied. "He brings supplies from his trading post, fair prices when others would cheat us, protection when needed." "And his heritage doesn't trouble you?" Mother Superior's eyes sharpened. "Christ teaches us to know the heart, not the appearance. I suggest you learn to do the same, Elizabeth." Outside, John helped her into the wagon with courteous hands, then took the reins from Miguel, who mounted a separate horse. "We have a half-day's journey to my home," John said, glancing at the sun. "Are you comfortable?" Elizabeth folded her hands in her lap, the new ring catching the light. "I hardly know what I am," she answered honestly. John nodded, accepting this truth as he snapped the reins, guiding the horses away from the convent and into their uncertain future together. The wagon rolled steadily northward, leaving behind the dusty cluster of buildings that comprised the settlement. Elizabeth sat straight-backed beside John, the simple gold band on her finger catching occasional glints of sunlight. Neither spoke as the town receded, as though words required distance from civilization to emerge. The late September heat pressed down, tempered only by sporadic breezes that carried the scent of sage and dry earth. The road, little more than a well-worn trail, wound gradually upward into the foothills, where pinon and juniper began to dot the landscape. Finally, as they crossed a small creek, John broke the silence. "You have questions," he said. Not a question, but an invitation. Elizabeth studied his profile, allowing herself to truly look at him for the first time. His features were strong, hawkish perhaps, but harmonious. The Apache markings she had initially found so shocking now seemed to belong to his face, emphasizing the sharp planes of his cheekbones, the steady watchfulness of his eyes. "Why the deception?" she asked. "Why not simply offer help to my family without this?" She gestured between them. John's hands remained steady on the reins. "Would you have accepted charity from a stranger?" "No," she admitted after a moment. "Nor would I have offered it. I don't believe in creating debts that can't be repaid. So, instead, you bought yourself a wife." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. He turned to look at her then, his dark eyes unreadable. "I offered a fair exchange. Security for your family, a future for your siblings. In return, I asked for partnership." "Partnership," Elizabeth repeated, tasting the word. "Not ownership, not submission, partnership. Most men would call it something else. I'm not most men, Mrs. Blackwood." The name still felt foreign, a garment that didn't quite fit. "Elizabeth," she corrected, "if we're to be partners, I'd prefer you use my given name." A slight nod. "Elizabeth, then, and I'm John." "Two Rivers," she said tentatively. Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, that she would acknowledge his Apache name. "That's what my mother called me. Tutsa Bitu, two rivers, for the two bloodlines that meet in me." His voice softened at the mention of his mother. "My father was William Blackwood, a trader from Boston. My mother was Nadli Biagi of the Mescalero Apache." Elizabeth absorbed this information, reconciling it with the fragments of rumor she'd heard. And they lived together, were married. After their fashion, yes. My father learned her ways, and she learned some of his. They built the trading post together, creating a place between worlds. "Where are they now?" John's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dead. 15 years ago, a group of settlers, frightened by rumors of Apache raids elsewhere, attacked the trading post. They killed my mother outright. My father died trying to defend her." Elizabeth's breath caught. "I'm sorry," she said, the words woefully inadequate for such a loss. "I was 17, he continued, old enough to take over the trading post, but young enough that both sides viewed me with suspicion. The whites saw an Apache. The Apache saw a white man's son." "Is that when you received your markings?" she asked carefully, glancing at the blue-black patterns on his face. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "No. Those came later. My mother's brother found me after the attack, took me to live with the tribe for 3 years. The markings were earned when I became a man in their eyes." He paused. "The same markings that make me unwelcome in many white settlements now." Elizabeth considered his words, understanding better why he had hidden his identity from her. The prejudice against native peoples ran deep in the territory, deeper still against those of mixed blood, forever caught between worlds. "Yet you run a successful trading post," she observed. Commerce creates strange bedfellows, John replied with a wry twist of his lips. Men who wouldn't sit at my table will still trade for my goods, and I have Miguel and a few others who act as my face when necessary. The terrain grew steeper, the wagon climbing a switchback trail that offered expanding views of the valley below. Elizabeth glimpsed the glint of a river winding through distant cottonwoods. "Is that the Rio Grande?" she asked, welcoming the change of subject. John nodded. "We follow one of its tributaries up into the foothills. The trading post sits at the junction of two smaller rivers, a good position for trade routes." "Two rivers," Elizabeth murmured, understanding his name anew. As the afternoon lengthened, she began to see signs of habitation: carefully tended fruit trees, irrigated garden plots, a well-maintained road. They rounded a bend, and Elizabeth caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The trading post was not the crude outpost she had imagined, but a substantial adobe compound. The main building, 2 stories tall with a covered wooden porch wrapping around 3 sides, was painted a warm terracotta. Several smaller outbuildings, a stable, and what appeared to be staff quarters formed a protective half-circle behind it. Before it stretched a cleared area where wagons could gather, and beyond that, a breathtaking view of the valley below. "It's beautiful," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. Something in John's posture relaxed slightly. "My mother designed it. She believed beauty was as necessary as function." As the wagon approached, several people emerged from the buildings. Miguel had ridden ahead and apparently announced their arrival. A short, plump Mexican woman with silver-streaked black hair hurried down the porch steps, wiping her hands on her apron. Behind her came a tall Apache man, his hair in 2 long braids, and a younger woman holding a small child. "That's Carmen," John said, nodding toward the older woman. "She's been with us since before I was born, housekeeper, cook, and the closest thing to family I have left. The man is Nilchi, my mother's cousin. The young woman is his daughter, Luna, with her son." Elizabeth felt a flutter of anxiety. What would these people think of her? Would they resent a white woman entering their carefully balanced world? As if reading her thoughts, John added, "They've been preparing for your arrival for weeks. Carmen has been especially excited. She's been without female company too long, she says." The wagon rolled to a stop in the courtyard. John set the brake and turned to Elizabeth before descending. "I know this isn't what you expected," he said quietly, "but I hope in time you might find some happiness here." Elizabeth met his gaze, struck by the sincerity in his dark eyes. "I hope so too," she replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Carmen reached the wagon before John could come around to help Elizabeth down, her round face alight with curiosity and welcome. "At last! At last!" the older woman exclaimed, her English flavored with a melodious Mexican accent. "Come, let me see the bride John has brought home." Elizabeth hesitated only briefly before placing her hands on John's waiting shoulders as he lifted her down from the wagon. His grip was firm, respectful, releasing her the moment her feet touched the packed earth of the courtyard. "Carmen," John said, "this is Elizabeth." The housekeeper studied Elizabeth openly, dark eyes taking in every detail from her simple wedding dress to her travel-must hair. Then, with a decisive nod, she stepped forward and embraced Elizabeth warmly. "Bienvenida, Señora Blackwood. Welcome to your home." The simple kindness of the greeting, so different from the stiff formality Elizabeth had expected, brought a sudden sting of tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, returning the embrace with hesitant arms. "Thank you," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Nilchi approached next, his weathered face impassive. He didn't offer his hand but inclined his head slightly. "Nilchi oversees our security and trade with the Apache bands," John explained. "He speaks little English, but understands more than he lets on." The Apache man's lips twitched, confirming John's assessment. He spoke briefly in his native tongue. "He welcomes you and asks for patience as you learn our ways," John translated. Luna, the young Apache woman, stepped forward with her small son balanced on her hip. Unlike her father, she smiled openly at Elizabeth. "I am glad you have come," she said in careful English. "This is my son Tanito. He is 3 winters." The little boy regarded Elizabeth solemnly, then buried his face in his mother's shoulder. Elizabeth smiled, reminded painfully of James. "He is beautiful," she said sincerely. Carmen clapped her hands. "Enough standing in the sun. Come inside, come. You must be tired, hungry. I have prepared a special meal to welcome you." She shepherded Elizabeth toward the main building, leaving John and Miguel to deal with the trunk and wagon. As they climbed the steps to the wide porch, Elizabeth absorbed details of her new home. The adobe walls were thick, designed to keep cool in summer and retain heat in winter. Colorful woven rugs hung as decoration, alongside carefully arranged clusters of dried herbs and flowers. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a spacious trading room with shelves of goods and a broad wooden counter. "The store is closed today in honor of the wedding," Carmen explained, following her gaze. "Normally, we open 3 days each week for trade." She led Elizabeth through a side door into the private living quarters. Here, the blending of cultures was even more evident. Apache baskets displayed alongside delicate china, a traditional loom in one corner, a Boston-made grandfather clock in another. The furnishings were simple but well-crafted. Sturdy wooden tables, comfortable chairs with woven seats, bookshelves filled with volumes in multiple languages. "John has prepared the best room for you," Carmen continued, leading Elizabeth up a narrow staircase. "It has the morning light and the view of both rivers." The bedroom was larger than Elizabeth had expected, dominated by a 4-poster bed draped with hand-woven blankets in rust and indigo patterns. A dresser with a mirror stood against one wall, a small writing desk beneath a window on another. Fresh wildflowers brightened a bedside table. "The bathing room is through there," Carmen indicated a connecting door. "John had it built last year. Pipes bring hot water from the kitchen. Very modern." Elizabeth's eyes widened. Indoor plumbing was a luxury unheard of in most of the territory. Even her family's ranch, once considered prosperous, had made do with outdoor pumps and heated kettles. "This is more than I anticipated," she admitted. Carmen's expression softened. "John has worked hard to create comfort here. Too long alone, that one. It will be good to have a woman's presence again." Before Elizabeth could respond to this, Carmen briskly changed subjects. "Now, I will have water brought for your bath. Rest, refresh yourself. We eat when the sun touches the western mountains." Left alone, Elizabeth sank onto the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation finally settling fully upon her shoulders. This morning, she had been Elizabeth Harmon, daughter of a deceased rancher, responsible for her struggling family. Now she was Elizabeth Blackwood, wife of a half-Apache trader, mistress of a remote trading post, unlike anything she had imagined. She moved to the window, gazing out at the view Carmen had praised. True to its name, the trading post sat where 2 small rivers joined, their waters glinting gold in the late afternoon light. Beyond stretched the vast expanse of territory, rugged, beautiful, untamed, like the man she had married. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. John stood in the doorway, her trunk at his feet. "Carmen is arranging your bath," he said, remaining on the threshold as if unwilling to enter what he considered her space. "Is the room suitable?" It's lovely," Elizabeth replied honestly, "far more comfortable than I expected." He nodded, seemingly pleased. "I want you to be comfortable here." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unasked questions about sleeping arrangements and marital expectations. Finally, John cleared his throat. "I've had a room prepared for myself down the hall," he said quietly. "I meant what I said about partnership, Elizabeth. I won't claim husband's rights until you're ready, if ever." Relief and something more complex flooded through her. "Thank you," she said simply. "Take time to settle in. We'll dine at sunset." He turned to go, then paused. "One thing you should know, we observe some Apache customs here. At meals, we offer the first portion to the spirits. It's a sign of respect." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for the instruction. "I'll remember." After he departed, women arrived with steaming buckets of water. Elizabeth luxuriated in the unexpected comfort of a proper bath, washing away the dust of travel and the remnants of her old life. She dressed in a simple blue skirt and white blouse from her trunk, then hesitantly joined the household downstairs. The dining room glowed with lantern light. John stood at the head of a long wooden table with Carmen, Nilchi, Luna, and little Tanito already seated. Miguel had departed, but two other men, trading post workers Elizabeth assumed, filled out the company. "My wife," John said, the word still new and strange, "Elizabeth." As she took her place at John's right hand, Elizabeth felt every eye upon her. This meal, she realized, was more than a welcome. It was an introduction, the beginning of her integration into this unusual household. John served her first, then raised his own plate slightly before setting it down. "To the spirits of this place," he said in English, then repeated what sounded like the same sentiment in Apache, "and to new beginnings." His eyes met Elizabeth's across the rim of his cup, and for the first time since their bizarre wedding, she felt a flutter of something beyond confusion or resignation, a tentative spark of curiosity about the man she had married and the life they might build together. The trading post came alive with the dawn. Elizabeth woke to unfamiliar sounds, the creak of wagon wheels, voices calling in Spanish and Apache, the rhythmic chopping of wood. She dressed quickly in a practical skirt and shirtwaist, eager to understand the workings of her new home. In the kitchen, Carmen kneaded dough with practiced hands, pausing only to pour Elizabeth a cup of rich coffee. "John has been awake for hours," she informed Elizabeth. "Trading day, very busy." Elizabeth sipped the coffee, stronger than she was accustomed to, but welcome. "May I help with something?" Carmen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "The Senora wants to work?" "I've never been idle," Elizabeth replied, "and I should learn how things operate here." The older woman smiled broadly. "Then come, I will show you." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Carmen guided Elizabeth through the household routines, where supplies were stored, how water was heated, which herbs hung from the kitchen rafters, and why. Meanwhile, through the windows, Elizabeth observed the trading floor coming to life as John and his workers arranged goods and prepared ledgers. By midday, the courtyard filled with wagons and horses, settlers from outlying homesteads, Mexican families from nearby villages, and even a small band of Apache arrived to trade. Elizabeth watched, fascinated, as John moved seamlessly between languages and customs, adjusting his manner for each customer, yet treating all with equal respect. "He has his father's head for business and his mother's gift for bringing people together," Carmen observed, standing beside Elizabeth at the kitchen window. "A rare combination." Elizabeth nodded, studying her husband with new eyes. John's Apache markings, so shocking at first, seemed to dissolve as she watched him work, not because she stopped seeing them, but because she began to see beyond them to the man himself. After the midday rush subsided, Elizabeth ventured onto the trading floor. John looked up from his ledger, surprise and pleasure flickering across his features. "Elizabeth, do you need something?" "Knowledge," she said, approaching the counter. "I'd like to understand what you do here." He regarded her thoughtfully, then motioned her behind the counter. "The trading post serves many communities," he explained, showing her the organized shelves and storage areas. We provide goods settlers can't easily obtain: tools, seeds, fabrics. For the Apache and other tribes, we offer fair trades for their blankets, pottery, and medicinals, which we then sell to settlers or ship east. And everyone trusts you to be fair, she asked. A shadow crossed his face. Not everyone. Some refuse to trade with the half-breed, as they say. Others come only because they have no choice. He shrugged. But those who deal honestly with me find I do the same. Elizabeth touched a beautifully woven Apache basket. You bridge two worlds. I try, he said quietly, though neither side fully accepts me. Their eyes met across the counter, and Elizabeth felt a sudden kinship with this man caught between identities. Wasn't she also suspended between worlds now, no longer just Elizabeth Harmon, not yet comfortable as Elizabeth Blackwood? In the days that followed, Elizabeth established a routine. Mornings she spent with Carmen, learning to prepare foods that blended Mexican, Apache, and American influences. Afternoons found her either helping John with correspondence and bookkeeping or working alongside Luna, learning to weave on the traditional loom. Luna proved a patient teacher and gradually a friend. As they worked side by side, the young Apache woman shared stories of her people and answered Elizabeth's careful questions about Apache customs. The markings on John's face, Elizabeth ventured one afternoon. What do they mean? Luna's fingers continued their rhythmic weaving. They tell of his journey to manhood, his vision quest in the mountains, his promise to honor both sides of his blood. My father gave him those marks after John saved our family during a season of great hunger. Elizabeth absorbed this, another piece of the puzzle that was her husband. Each evening they dined together as a household. John remained courteous but distant, true to his promise not to press for a true marriage. They spoke of trading post-business, local news, books they had read, safe topics that allowed them to circle each other like cautious dancers, neither quite ready to step closer. On the seventh night, as the household retired, John approached Elizabeth on the porch where she stood, watching the stars. I ride to your family's ranch tomorrow, he said, to deliver supplies and check their welfare as promised. Elizabeth's heart leapt. May I come with you? He studied her face in the moonlight. You wish to see them? Very much. And she hesitated. I'd like them to see that I'm well, that you're not what they feared. Something softened in his expression. We'll leave at first light. As she prepared for bed that night, Elizabeth realized with surprise that she no longer felt like a prisoner fulfilling an obligation. The trading post was becoming familiar, its rhythms aligning with her own. And John, complicated, honorable John, was becoming someone she wanted to understand rather than someone she needed to fear. She fell asleep, wondering what her family would make of the changes in her, and if they would see what she was only beginning to recognize herself. That perhaps this arranged marriage held possibilities neither she nor John had dared to imagine. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold as Elizabeth and John set out for the Harmon Ranch. They traveled in a small wagon loaded with supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, medicine for her mother, books for the children, and seeds for the winter garden. Elizabeth had risen early to help Carmen pack a basket of fresh bread and dried fruit for the journey, her movements quick with anticipation. The road unwound before them, descending from the foothills into more familiar territory. Elizabeth felt a strange doubling of perspective. These were the same vistas she had known all her life, yet they looked different now, as if her eyes had been recalibrated during her time at the trading post. Nervous? John asked as they crossed the creek that marked the boundary of Harmon land. Elizabeth smoothed her skirt, conscious of having chosen her nicest dress for the visit. A little. They'll have questions. About me, he said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. She nodded, studying his profile. John had dressed with care as well, in a crisp white shirt and black vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He'd tied his hair back neatly, and while he made no attempt to hide the Apache markings on his face, he had foregone any jewelry or adornments that might heighten their effect. "They're going to be shocked," she said honestly. "Especially Thomas. He's at that age where everything seems black and white. And which am I to him, black or white?" John's tone held no bitterness, just a weary acceptance. "Neither. That's what will confuse him most." As they rounded the final bend, the Harmon homestead came into view. Elizabeth's chest tightened at the sight of the familiar weathered clapboard house, the oak tree she had climbed as a child, the fenced garden where her mother had taught her to tend seedlings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the front door stood open to the morning air. Little James spotted them first. He had been feeding chickens in the yard, but dropped his pail and ran toward the wagon with a cry of delight. "Lizzie! Lizzie's home!" His shout brought the others, Sarah bursting from the door with a dish towel still in her hands, followed more slowly by Thomas, his young face already hardening into wariness as he caught sight of John. Elizabeth didn't wait for the wagon to fully stop before jumping down, gathering James into her arms and lifting him, though he was almost too big for such treatment now. "Let me look at you," she said, holding him at arm's length. "Have you grown 3 inches in a week?" "I lost a tooth," he announced proudly, displaying the gap. "And I carved another bird, better than the last one." Sarah reached them then, her face a mixture of joy and uncertainty. "We didn't know you were coming today." "John thought to surprise you," Elizabeth said, embracing her sister tightly. Over Sarah's shoulder she watched Thomas approach, his stance wary as a young colt scenting a predator. John remained in the wagon, giving the family space for their reunion. Elizabeth turned to include him, conscious of how this moment would set the tone for all future interactions. "This is John Blackwood," she said clearly. "My husband." Thomas's gaze locked onto the markings on John's face, his expression shifting from wariness to outright suspicion. "You're Apache," he said bluntly. John met the boy's stare evenly. "My mother was Mescalero Apache. My father was a Boston trader. I'm both and neither, depending on who's doing the looking." The frank answer seemed to catch Thomas off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, then settled for a curt nod. "Where's Mother?" Elizabeth asked, breaking the tension. "Inside. She's having a good day," Sarah said. "The medicine helped." They moved as a group toward the house, John carrying the heaviest supplies, while Elizabeth kept one arm around James, who chattered non-stop about everything she had missed. The boy showed no fear of John, only natural curiosity about the markings on his face and the knife sheathed at his belt. Inside, Elizabeth found her mother sitting up in a chair near the window, a quilt across her lap despite the mild day. Rebecca Harmon's face was thinner than Elizabeth remembered, her complexion still pale, but her eyes brightened at the sight of her eldest daughter. "Lizzie," she breathed, "let me see you." Elizabeth knelt beside her mother's chair, allowing herself to be studied. Whatever Rebecca saw in her daughter's face must have reassured her, for she relaxed visibly. "You look well," she said, "not unhappy." "I'm not," Elizabeth confirmed softly. "Things are different than I expected, but not in a bad way." Her mother's gaze shifted to John, who stood respectfully by the door, giving mother and daughter privacy while remaining visible. The older woman's eyes widened slightly at the sight of his Apache markings, but she showed none of the fear or disgust Elizabeth had dreaded. "So you are the mysterious benefactor," Rebecca said. "Come closer, please. My lungs don't allow for projection anymore." John approached, bowing slightly in greeting. "Mrs. Harmon, I'm honored to meet you." "Are you?" she asked, her tone direct but not unkind. Most men in these parts wouldn't consider it an honor to meet the mother of their mail-order bride. Elizabeth flushed. "Mother? No. She's right to speak plainly. John interrupted gently. "Mrs. Harmon, I won't insult you with pretty lies. I arranged this marriage because I admired your daughter from afar, but knew my heritage made a conventional courtship impossible. What began as a practical arrangement, I hope might grow into something more genuine. In the meantime, I can promise Elizabeth will want for nothing, and your family will always have my protection." Rebecca studied him intently, then nodded once. "A fair answer. Now, will you join us for the midday meal? Sarah makes an excellent stew, and I'd like to know the man who's taken my daughter." The meal was initially awkward, with Thomas maintaining a stony silence and Sarah speaking only when directly addressed. But gradually, as John answered Rebecca's forthright questions about the trading post, his business and his background, the atmosphere warmed. "You truly trade with both settlers and Apache?" Thomas finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity. John nodded. "And Mexican villagers, traveling peddlers, even the occasional army patrol. Commerce creates common ground where politics often fails." "But how do you decide where your loyalties lie?" the boy pressed. "If there was trouble between settlers and Apache, which side would you choose?" Elizabeth tensed, but John considered the question seriously. "I choose peace whenever possible," he said. "When that fails, I choose justice. And when justice is unclear, I choose compassion. I find those principles serve better than blind loyalty to any one group." Thomas frowned, clearly finding the answer more complex than he'd anticipated. Before he could respond, Rebecca turned the conversation to more practical matters. The supplies John had brought, the state of the winter garden, plans for spring planting. After the meal, while Sarah and the children showed John around the ranch, Elizabeth remained inside with her mother. "He's not what I expected," Rebecca admitted, watching through the window as John examined the roof of the barn with Thomas, pointing out areas that needed repair. "Nor I," Elizabeth said. "But he's a good man, Mother. Honorable, patient." Rebecca's shrewd eyes studied her daughter's face. "But not yet a true husband?" Heat rose to Elizabeth's cheeks. "He's given me time, space. He says he wants a partnership, not ownership." "Unusual in a man," her mother observed, "but perhaps not unwelcome." Elizabeth watched as John lifted James onto his shoulders to better see a hawk circling overhead, the boy's delight evident even at a distance. "No," she said softly, "not unwelcome at all." The journey back to the trading post was quieter than their morning ride had been, both Elizabeth and John absorbed in their thoughts as the wagon climbed steadily into the foothills. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trail, and the breeze carried the scent of pine and sage. "Thank you," Elizabeth said finally, breaking the companionable silence, "for today, for being patient with Thomas." John's hands remained steady on the reins. "He's protective of you. That's as it should be." Even so, his questions were direct. "Honest questions deserve honest answers," John replied with a slight shrug. "Besides, I'd rather have his open suspicion than hidden resentment." Elizabeth studied her husband's profile, struck by this insight. It was true. Thomas's bluntness had cleared the air in a way that polite evasion never could. By the time they'd departed, her brother had even accepted John's offer to teach him proper roof repair on their next visit. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," John added. "I see where you get your strength." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "She liked you, I could tell." "I'm glad. Family approval matters, even in unusual arrangements like ours." Unusual arrangements. The phrase hung between them, a reminder of the practical foundations of their marriage. Yet Elizabeth found herself increasingly unable to think of John as merely a business partner or reluctant protector. Over the past week, she had glimpsed too many facets of him. The fair trader, the respectful leader, the man who spoke to children at their level and old women with genuine reverence. The wagon hit a rut, jostling them closer together. Elizabeth's shoulder pressed briefly against John's, and she felt rather than heard his quick intake of breath at the contact. Neither moved away immediately. As they crested the final ridge before the trading post, the sun dipped below the western mountains, setting the sky ablaze with color. John halted the wagon, allowing them both to appreciate the spectacle. "My mother called this the sky's gift to those patient enough to watch," he said softly. Elizabeth turned to find him looking not at the sunset, but at her. Something in his gaze, admiration mingled with a carefully restrained longing, sent a flutter through her chest. "John," she began, not entirely certain what she meant to say. The moment shattered at the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the direction of the trading post. Miguel appeared on horseback, his usually stoic face tight with urgency. "Riders," he reported tersely. "6 men from town, armed. Looking for you, patron." John's expression hardened. "What did they want?" "They said nothing to me. Spoke only to Nilchi, demanding to see the half-breed and his white woman." "Their words, not mine." Miguel's mouth twisted with distaste. "Nilchi told them you were away. They said they would return tomorrow." Elizabeth's stomach clenched. "Who were they?" "I recognize Thornton Wade," Miguel replied, glancing at her. "The others were strangers to me." "Cecily Wade's father," Elizabeth murmured to John. "The same woman who spread the most vicious rumors about you." John's jaw tightened. "And a man known for his hatred of all native peoples." He clicked his tongue, urging the horses forward. "We'd better return quickly." The trading post was unnaturally quiet when they arrived, a tension humming in the air. Carmen met them in the courtyard, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by worried efficiency as she helped unload the wagon. "They were looking for trouble," she said in a low voice. "Drinking, armed. Nilchi and the boys kept them outside, but it was unpleasant." Inside, John called a meeting of the household in the main room. "Miguel, secure the horses and wagons in the lower stable tonight. Nilchi, post watches until dawn. No one should be alone outside." The gravity of his tone sent a chill through Elizabeth. This was not the measured trader or the patient husband, but a man who had faced danger before and knew its scent. "What do they want?" she asked when the others had dispersed to their tasks. John's expression was grim. "To remind me of my place, most likely. Or to warn you of yours." "Because I married you." "Because you married an Apache half-breed," he corrected bluntly. "Some men can't abide seeing a white woman choose to be with a man like me." "I didn't exactly choose," Elizabeth began, then stopped herself, suddenly aware of how the words would sound. Pain flickered in John's eyes, quickly masked. "No, you didn't. Which is why you should stay inside tomorrow when they return. I'll handle Thornton and his men. And if they're looking for a fight, then I'll disappoint them," he said with quiet certainty. "I've spent my life finding peaceful paths between worlds. I won't abandon that principle now." Elizabeth watched as he walked away to confer with Nilchi, his shoulders straight despite the weight they carried. In that moment, something shifted within her, a recognition that the arranged marriage she had entered reluctantly had become something she now fiercely wanted to protect. Later that night, unable to sleep, Elizabeth stood at her bedroom window, gazing at the stars. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. John stood in the hallway, still fully dressed, his face lined with the concerns of the day. "I wanted to check that you were comfortable, that you felt safe." "I do," she said truthfully. He nodded, turning to go. "John." Her voice halted him. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm not ashamed to be your wife." He looked back at her, surprise and something deeper darkening his eyes. "When those men come," she continued, "I'll stand with you, not behind you. With you." John took a step toward her, then stopped himself, as if uncertain of his welcome. Elizabeth closed the distance between them, standing close enough to catch the scent of pine and leather that always surrounded him. "Elizabeth," he murmured, his voice rough with restrained emotion. "I don't want you in danger." "I've been in danger since the day my father died," she replied steadily. "The difference now is that I'm not facing it alone." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, John raised his hand to her face. His fingers were calloused but gentle as they traced the curve of her cheek. Elizabeth's breath caught, not with fear, but with a sudden rush of awareness, of his height, his strength, the heat of his skin near hers. "I never expected," he began. She placed her hand over his, holding it against her face. "Nor did I." The kiss, when it came, was tentative, a question rather than a demand. Elizabeth answered by stepping closer, her free hand coming to rest on his chest where she could feel the rapid beating of his heart. Dawn arrived with the distant sound of approaching riders. Elizabeth dressed quickly in a simple blue dress, her hair braided and pinned in a crown around her head, not the appearance of a victim or a woman ashamed, but of the mistress of the trading post standing alongside its master. John waited for her at the foot of the stairs, his expression softening as she descended. Last night's kiss had changed something between them, opening a door neither had been certain existed. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. Elizabeth took his offered arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Yes, I do." Together they walked onto the front porch, just as 6 riders entered the courtyard. Thornton Wade led the group, a barrel-chested man with a florid face and cold eyes. He dismounted heavily, spitting tobacco juice into the dust before looking up at them. "So it's true," he called, his voice carrying in the morning stillness. "Old man Harmon's daughter, living with a marked savage." Elizabeth felt John's arm tense beneath her hand. Behind Wade, the other men remained mounted, hands conspicuously near their weapons. "Mr. Wade," John acknowledged evenly. "What brings you to our home?" "Came to make sure the girl hasn't been coerced," Wade replied, his gaze shifting to Elizabeth. "Your mama's worried sick about you, girl. Town's been talking. We've come to take you back where you belong." Elizabeth stepped forward, still holding John's arm. "I'm exactly where I belong, Mr. Wade, with my husband in our home." Wade's face darkened. "Husband? That ain't no proper marriage. That's an abomination." "The church and the law disagree," John said calmly, though Elizabeth could feel the anger he contained. "Our marriage was performed by Father Thomas and is legally registered in the territorial records." "You tricked her," Wade accused, "or paid her family off." "Neither," Elizabeth interjected sharply. "I married John knowing exactly who and what he is, a good man, a fair trader, and yes, half Apache. I'm not ashamed of any part of him." From the corner of her eye, Elizabeth caught movement as Nilchi and Miguel positioned themselves strategically around the courtyard, rifles not aimed but clearly present. Carmen stood in the doorway behind them, a shotgun partially hidden in the folds of her skirt. Wade noticed too, his gaze darting around the compound. "You'd hide behind your Apache friends? Let them threaten white men?" "No threats have been made," John replied evenly. "But this is our home, and you came armed and uninvited." "I suggest you return to town, Mr. Wade," Elizabeth added, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Tell my mother I'm well and happy. Tell the town whatever you wish. It changes nothing." Wade's companions shifted uncomfortably, clearly having expected a different reception. Perhaps a cowering woman in need of rescue or an aggressive savage who would give them cause for violence. "You've made your choice then, girl," Wade said, his tone ugly. "Don't come crying to decent folk when you realize your mistake." "The only mistake would be allowing fear and ignorance to dictate my happiness," Elizabeth responded, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Good day, gentlemen." For a moment, she thought Wade might refuse to leave, his face purpled with rage, his hand twitching toward his gun belt. But a quiet click from Miguel's direction reminded him of his precarious position. With a final venomous glare, Wade spat once more in the dust, remounted, and led his men from the courtyard at a pace just short of retreat. Elizabeth didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until John's arm encircled her waist, supporting her as the tension drained away. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen," he murmured against her hair. She turned in his embrace to face him. Not brave, just true. The household gradually resumed its normal rhythm around them, but John and Elizabeth remained on the porch, watching the dust settle in the wake of the departed riders. "They may return," John cautioned, "or others like them." "And we'll face them together," Elizabeth replied, "as we will everything else." He studied her face, searching for doubt or regret. "When I arranged this marriage, I never dared hope for this, for you to truly accept me. Nor did I expect to find a partner instead of a master." Elizabeth reached up to trace the markings on his face, no longer foreign to her touch or her heart. "We've both crossed rivers to find each other, 2 rivers." John's smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of caution and containment she had grown so used to seeing. He drew her closer, no longer hesitant in his touch. "There will still be difficulties," he warned. "The territory isn't kind to those who defy its unwritten rules. Then we'll write new ones," she said simply. In the distance, the 2 rivers that gave the trading post its name flowed together, separate waters joining to create something stronger. Above, the endless New Mexico sky stretched blue and boundless with possibility. Elizabeth had entered this marriage as a sacrifice, a desperate bargain to save her family. She remained in it now as a choice, a commitment not just to the arrangement but to the man himself, complex, honorable, caught between worlds yet at home in his own skin. "My husband," she said, testing the words and finding them true at last. John bent to kiss her, no longer asking permission, but claiming what was freely given. And in that kiss was a promise, not the reluctant vow of their wedding day, but a deeper covenant between equals who had found in each other not just security or passion, but belonging. In the end, it wasn't an arranged marriage that bound them. It was the truth they discovered together, that love, like water, finds its own path between the stones of prejudice and fear, carving new landscapes where different worlds can meet and flourish as one.